something I've heard you talk about before, and interestingly, I spoke about with Mike Chadwick last week, ex-paratrooper, and it's the external validation that we all need as human beings from when we're doing things that we're A, proud of, or B, find difficult, and not receiving the feedback that we want or crave, and then that stopping us from moving forwards, even if the thing is something we're passionate about. So I know in the jungle, as part of SF selection, you don't get much feedback at all, if any, from the DS, do you? And that often breaks a lot of the applicants because they aren't sure where they are in the pecking order. And as with selection, you don't really know how you're getting on, because it's not if you're in the first 50 you'll be fine. It's where are you with the pack? What's the parameters are always moving, aren't they? So it means that people are in the dark and need to keep moving forwards without knowing that they're doing a good job. And I think that feeds into why habits can seem not very sexy to people, because there's nobody giving you a pat on the back for ignoring your phone for the last 60 minutes. It's kind of you versus you in that sense, and you need to try and implement these things over time so that you're just constantly moving forward. So how did you respond to not having that validation from the directing staff? And do you have any other examples of guys you were with or anything you witnessed that didn't allow them to continue, where the external validation was what they really needed to be able to actually move forwards?
This directly ties back again to process and your ideal self. And this is the change we see all the people on our course. As they go through it, they get much better at just when you really love the process, you like the result does become less and less important, but also your ability to self-validate becomes much easier, and that is so powerful when you're not looking for that external feedback. So with the jungle, you're absolutely right. You basically hardly get any feedback, and the jungle is such a hard environment to soldier in that you make mistakes all the time, and the DS is just there and they're making notes to their pad. I'll give you an example. We our patrol, like everything is just hard work, and we were filling up our water before we had to go and meet our DS. We were doing a patrol Navex or something that day, and we were in a bit of a rush anyway to make the timing, and all of the patrol were over the other side. There was a river and a big like fallen tree with some rope across it to get across the other side, and 6 of the patrol were over that side, and myself and one other were getting the water, and it's down on this like kind of muddy bank. We're filling up the water bottles, and then we were like coming back up the bank, and I slipped a bit, and I only found this out afterwards, but one of the other guys in the patrol said to me, I was like, Jeffries is having a bad day, isn't he? Because I just slipped. He's like, he'll probably fall off the bridge next. Sure enough, what happened? So I was going across this log bridge and slipped, and I fell. I grabbed the rope and I fell, and I was like, because you've got a massive burden on your back, so that weight, and I was literally, imagine at 90 degrees, like perpendicular to the log, just holding onto the rope. And I was like, well, fucking hell, I've just got to let go. There's nothing else I can do. So I let go, dropped like 5 feet, luckily onto the bank, not the river. But then like my weapon was covered in mud. I was covered in mud. So then got back up, got over, raced, we got there, got to the DS. What's the first thing he says? Right, strip your weapons, show them to me, because they're expected to be clean all the time. And there's nothing you can do. You just have to like hand your weapon over covered in mud. And so things like that kind of happen all the time. And if you let that get into your head, if I'd let that get into my head and be like, oh, you failed, because that's obviously a big black mark. But because I was I'd had that moment before where I'd taken the pressure off, but B, this was all I wanted to do. There was no way I was going to come off that course unless I was taken off or medically taken off. Like, no, I was going to stay there to the end.
How would you have
do
felt
my best each day?
If you'd handed your weapon over covered in mud and he said, "That's you, done. You're off home, mate." How would you have felt? Would you have been happy with the effort you'd put in and accepted the mistake was the mistake, or would you have been wrestling with yourself that you could have done things differently?
I would, up until that point, it's got it so long ago now, like obviously you'd be massively disappointed. Like for me, I just would have put myself straight back on. So especially with the tools now, it's quite hard retrospectively to think about it, but you have to, hindsight, is a wonderful tool, and we can always think, did we do this or did we do that? And it's good to identify the mistakes, but you have to, and this is something you do in the military, you have to look at that time, did you make the best decisions you could have with the information you had, or take the actions that you had. And it kind of comes in, so I'll answer your question in a bit of a roundabout way, because it was something I was going to come on to. So when I finished the jungle, you don't know if you've passed until you go back to Hereford. So you've got a few days like decompression stuff, and then you fly back, and then you're told. But when you actually finish, because you're under the canopy, under the trees for 4 weeks, like pretty much tactical the whole time, and then you get a helicopter back out to the army battle camp out there, where you're kind of staying until you leave. And they hand you a beer when the index is called, and you're on that helicopter. And I remember sitting on that helicopter, flying over the canopy, and that was that was more satisfying than even passing, like getting my berry and stuff at the end. Because in that moment, even though I didn't know if I'd passed, I knew that I'd done all that I could. And so whatever the result was, I was like, I couldn't have done any more. And that like moment of self kind of validation, that meant more to me. I was like, you're like, you know, you did it. Because it is, you can't explain the trees to people. Like the point in Brecon marching around with the weight on your back, that's not selection. That's just to get your plane ticket. Like, it is difficult, it's boring, and it's shit, and it is physically taxing to a degree. But it's not like, if you find that hard, then good luck in the jungle, because it's really not. Like, the jungle is just a whole other level of physical and mental hardship, where you're just on the edge of what you're capable of every single day. Like, it just really tests you. And so for me, getting through that and getting to the end of it, I was like, you know, you did good there. It was a good effort. And that kind of self-satisfaction, and I think it is somewhat personality driven, as in, ever since I was a kid, like, I never needed or expected my parents or anyone to come to a football match, or I think, like, I just never needed. I was always, I think I naturally had that to a degree of, I know when I've put in the effort, and if I'm happy with that, fine. I don't need anyone else to tell me what that is. That's up for me to define. And it is powerful. It does take a huge amount of distress off. Like, obviously it is nice to get that validation from other people, but the more you can move towards your own metrics of defining, which only comes from knowing who you really are and who you want to be and how you want to live, and your values and your own integrity, when you act in line with that, it just makes life a lot easier, as opposed to always looking for someone to externally validate what you're capable of.